Boker Tov. Today's daf is Daf Yud in Gitin, as we learned for a Forshlim, for Loza ben Reuma, Yosef ben Chanichal, and Avner ben Narkis, who's having an operation today. Says Mishnah, Daf Yud Tes. B'chol kosmin, you can write the get with any writing instrument, meaning not instrument, with any compound that you're using to write. In other words, you can't write with a pencil because that is easily erased. But you could write with dio, which is regular ink, which is a tree-based compound. Kati says they make it from an oak tree. It's like a galna type of juice that comes from an oak tree. The sam is also, sam can mean a poison. It's also a compound. Rashi says that's orpiment. It's also a plant-based plant, or based. Some say it's made from the kind of an earth. The sikra is like a red dye. But kumus is also based on a tree. It's a sap from a tree. Says Rashi, but kankamtum, he calls that kankamtum is also a kind of a chemical compound. And there's no Rashi doesn't tell us about that, but Rashi says later on we'll see that it's also it's a kind of a gum or a tree-based compound. Hold up a shoe shell, kind of anything which is lasting. You can't write with something which doesn't last, which is going to disappear. You can't write with a liquid peros, not fruit juice. Hold up anything that doesn't last. So the key is you can write it. It doesn't have to be black. You can write with sikra, which is a red paint or red pigment. You can write, but it's got to be lasting. I'll call custom. Now, what can you write it on? We discussed this. Somebody asked us earlier a couple of weeks ago. Does it have to be parchment? No. You can write it on any kind of paper. I'll call custom. You could even, according to Tanakh, you could even write it on a tree leaf, a leaf of an olive tree. Ala Karen Shalpar. You could even write it on the horn of a bull, Vinosinlos apara, or a cow, whatever, and you give it the whole cow. You can't cut it off because we had before it says custom and you can't have a necessary action between, or an action that takes place between the time you write it and cutting it off. Not time based, but simply you can't have something like you can't write it on a tree and then cut off that part of the tree and give it to it. It's got to be something where you write it and give it to it directly without having to have any interim action. You can write it on you have to give it the whole part. You can write it on the hand of an Evet Kanani, even though it's not you can give it the Evet. Obviously, it's an Evet Kanani which you can own. We'll talk about this, that you can't write on something which is alive. Yeah, on food, because the pasuk Sefer Creases that doesn't fit into the word Sefer Creases. A book is not Ruach Chaim, paper is not Ruach Chaim, and nor is food. It's not called food is not called a Sefer. So Rabbi Yossi disagrees with the Tanakh on that. What are these things? Dio is diusa, which we already call ink, black ink. Sam is sama, which again comes from the earth. Rashi says that's orpiment. It's like kind of an earth. Also, it's a kind of a chemical growth that's found in the earth. Sikra Amar Vachana, Sikra Sashma. It's called sikra. That's a red pigment that we've talked about elsewhere. Kumus is kuma, which she says is the sap of a tree. Kankantam Vachana. What is that? It's the shoemaker's blacking. It's the black that a shoemaker uses. But again, this is a plant-based kind of a compound, which all these things have one thing in common, that they last. When you put them on paper, on parchment, or on the arm of a evet, arm of a human being, they will last. Those are inks that last for a long time. You can't even wash them off. And the same thing if you put it on on the limb or the horn of a para and give it the whole para, all Tanakh says that's all good. Anything that lasts, let's say what does that include? Let's see what the Tanakh Chanina. So let's say you wrote it on dirty rainwater, or you wrote it with dirty rainwater, that it was so dirty that it had something that it lasted. When you use that rainwater, you used it like it's an ink, or after's galna juice. These things are also koshers, and we'll see that the galna juice. We're going to talk about that a lot, because the Sifrei Torah and the parchments were always treated with galna juice before. And therefore, if you wrote it with galna juice on the parchment that was treated with galna juice, it wouldn't appear. It's like writing one thing on top of the other. But if you wrote it, let's say, on a regular piece of paper or on a leaf, whatever, and you wrote that with golden juice, that also lasts. And same thing with dirty rainwater. Rashi says meitaria is make shamim. This is another interpretation. It says water that you soak the fruits in, or whatever. The key is it has to be lasting. If you wrote it with lead, the shachar with coal, the shichur, same thing as the charsa, the ushkifi, that's the shoemaker's black, and kosher, those are all kosher because these things last. Itmar. Now we come to an interesting question. On Shabbos, of the 39 malachas, one is writing 2 osios. If you write 2 letters, you're chayav on Shabbos, that's a malach on Shabbos. And another one is mochik, erasing. If you erased you didn't erase it, stam to destroy. If you erase it, stam, you erase something and you want to get rid of it. That's mochik shalom and aslichto. That's like destruction, mekalko, which is potter on Shabbos, potter also. If you erase something in order to write something else in its place, to write something better, that's chayfer. So it's mochek is a malacha. It's mochek amanas lichtov, and the same thing. Ksiva itself, writing is a malacha. Those 2 things are malacha. So what happens in this case? Let's say you had writing on a document before Shabbos, and now you wrote black on top of the right. You didn't add any new letters. On top of the red letters, there were red letters on this document before Shabbos, and on Shabbos you wrote black on top of the red. Is that writing or not? So Rabbi Yochanan, they both agree. Chayiv 2 malachas on Shabbos. What do you mean? Achas mishum kos, achas mishum mochek. Number one, you're erasing the red. And you're erasing the red in order to put the black on there. So it's mochek amanas lichtov, and you're writing with black. In other words, maybe the red wouldn't look so good, or can't see it in a certain kind of a sun. You wanted to write it on black. So you had something written in red, and you wrote over it the exact same letters. You didn't add any other space on the blank space. You wrote the black on top of the red. Rabbi Yochanan say you're chayiv 2 for mochek and kosei. Okay, let's say diol gavidio. Let's say you had black on black. It was already written in black, and you just added more ink on top of it for whatever reason. So there, or red on red, potter, because you didn't erase and you didn't add on anything new. You didn't write anything new. Potter, of course, potter means part of law, so you shouldn't do it on Shabbos, but you're not chayav. Sikra gavidio. What happens? Red on black. So I'm the chayav. Some say you're chayav, and some say you're potter. I'm the chayav because mochiku, because you're erasing the black when you put the red on top of the black. The black on top of the red, everybody agrees you're not only erasing the red, but you're adding on the black. So that's mochek and kosei. But if it's black, if it's red on black, some say you're chayav, some say you're potter. Some say you're chayav because you are knocking out the black. I'm a potter. Some say mekaltul. No, you're simply spoiling or ruining what was written there before. Some say you're chayav, some say you're potter. Okay. So the key, though, as we said, is that if you put black on red, you're chayav 2. Here we come to the question, we discussed this before. Adam she'ein yodem lachtom. Let's say Adam don't know how to sign. They're illiterate, they can't sign their names. Mao sheyichtabu lem b'sikra. Can you write for them? Can you prepare for them? Write for them. You outline it in red. You outline it red. The yachtamu, and they will sign on top. We mentioned before when we learned this back on Daf Tes, that if you write on, let's say you wrote it for them in one color and they outline it on top, you didn't fill in the whole color first because otherwise it was already written. It was written before. So if somebody else wrote it, then whoever wrote it, they're the ones who signed it, it's not the proper Adam. Maybe the guys who signed it aren't kosher Adam for whatever reason. The guys who first outlined it or whatever, maybe a cotton or a goy or whatever. So can you outline it for them in red? In other words, first write it in red, and they'll write the black on top again, leaving a little bit part of the red out, so that they are writing something. That's what Farshim say. But the question is, can you write black on red? Right? Is it right? Ksav el yom ksav or ain't ksav? Is it considered writing or not? So if Adam don't know how to sign, they don't know how to sign their signature. But you outline it for them first. You write out their names in advance, and then they write it on top. So is that a signature or not? Amalei ain't ksav. So Rabbi Lakish asked Rabbi Yochanan this question, and he says, no, it's not writing. That's not a signature. And there's with the Adam who can't write, but they give him black ink, and they said, wherever it's red, just write on top of that. That's not considered writing. Amalei v'alol maratona Rabbani, you taught us. Not only he taught us, but Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish both said that before. So I guess he must have learned from Yochanan. By Shabbos, we said if it was written in red and you put black on top, you're chayav for mochek and kosei. So you're writing there. You said that Shabbos. Before we said just a few lines above that Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish both said that. So Rish Lakish must have learned it from Rabbi Yochanan, because Rish Lakish now said to Rabbi Yochanan, if it's not considered a signature, black on red on a get. So why is it? Why you chayav on Shabbos? Well, limit on Barak Sava and Shabbos. Just because I think that's you'd be chayav, or we'd say over here you could do a mice and say that's considered a good signature. If you need Adam on a star on a get, let's say we're not talking about in general. We're not talking about this dafka a get isha at this point. We're not necessarily talking about a get isha at this point, but it's referring to get isha, maybe other stars also, where you need Adam signed on it. Remember, by get isha lamaisa, you don't need Adam signed on it, but if they sign, they have to be kosher. According to Rav Lazar, we pass like Rav Lazar. But anyway, we sign on it anyway. Just you should have Adam in case you can't find the Adam Asira. You could find these guys. So he said to him, can you sign this way? If the Adam don't know how to sign, they're kosher in all aspects. They keep mitzvahs, etc. But they're just illiterate. They don't know how to sign. So he said, you can't do that. I have Shabbos. He said that's considered a signature. He says just because we think it might be a signature, it might be chayav. On Shabbos, that's what our opinion is. My opinion is that that's similar to writing, and you should be chayav. I'm not going to be matter it. You're not just because I'm machmer when it comes to Shabbos. I'm not going to be makel and say that these are kosher Adam over here for signing on a document, whether it's a get isha or some other get. And Rashi points out here a very key thing. Rashi says above, even with the Tosas Kankantum, Rashi says, "Lahaka, we're going to be makel over here just because we're machmer by Shabbos. We're not going to be makel over here." I feel in Shabbos Rashi says in Bam when the base midrash is here and somebody there was some red writing and somebody blackened it, put black on top. I wouldn't be somach. I wouldn't depend on my own words. I wouldn't rely on my own words. I wouldn't bring a carbon. In other words, if let's say the base midrash was here and somebody said, you know what, on Shabbos I didn't realize it was Shabbos. I saw that red writing and I couldn't stand it. I wrote black on it. I didn't realize it was Shabbos. So I bring the carbon now, chatas, bring malach on Shabbos. I didn't do it on purpose. I forgot that it was Shabbos. So am I chayiv now? We wouldn't say bring a carbon because maybe you're not chayiv. Maybe it was red before and you added on the black. That's not writing. So I think I would say you're chayiv twice. I would be machmer and say you should, but I wouldn't bring a carbon based on that. That's when he answered him. So therefore, he wasn't clear. He says, black on red, even though by Shabbos we would be machmir in the sense that you shouldn't do it. And I would think you'd be high, but I wouldn't bring a carbon based on that. I'm not going to be makel for signatures. You don't bring a carbon, but suffix you don't bring a carbon. If you're not sure, if you're not sure, you could bring what's called a asher tolui. If you're not sure if you committed a sin, but over here we're saying we're not even sure if this is a sin. And here you know what you did. You just don't know if it's a sin. For example, what you don't know is, let's say you ate. There were two pieces of meat. One was kosher, one wasn't kosher. And not kosher in the sense you're chayiv chorus, like chaylev. And you're not sure if you ate the kosher piece or the non-kosher piece. You ate something. You're not sure what you bring an ashram tali. Here you know what you did. We just don't know if that's even chayiv, if you're chayiv for that. So in a case like that, presume you wouldn't bring an ashram, you wouldn't bring a carbon at all. In other words, we know what you did. We know what you did. And you know what you did. But we're not sure if you're chayiv for that. We wouldn't bring a carbon. So that's the question. So he told him, no, you for a star, we wouldn't write black on red if the guy doesn't know. Idmar, another solution for Adam who don't know how to sign. Idmar, Adam shein yom machtam. What do you do? Rav Meir Shapiro chalak. You cut for them in the near. You trace it out. You etch it out. You make an incision in the paper. You scratch out what their initials, what their name. The letters of their name, and they fill it in with ink. That's what Rav says. That's the solution. Again, black on red, not so sure because it's already written there. The letters are written. So if somebody already wrote their name out and however they signed it, however their name would be written, and then they wrote on top of it, maybe that's not even writing. That may not even be writing because what are they adding on? So that's what he said when it comes to signatures. But what about, can you not write it, but can you etch it out in the paper and they will fill it in with ink? Rav says, Shmuel Omar. Shmuel says, not with ink. Amr be'aver, even with lead. How is that right? You're saying not with. I'm sorry. Tanakama said, Rav said, you etch it out and fill it in with ink. Shmuel says you don't have to etch it out. You could even write with lead. Like today you take like a number 2 pencil, with which has got lead in it, and write that, and then you can sign it with ink on top of it. That's what he says. Shmuel Be'aver says more Be'aver. How can you write with Aver? That's real writing. If you write it with lead, you said before, if you write it with lead or with coal or with shoemaker's blacking, that's real writing. So you can't write it first. Somebody writes your name out, right? And you just write on top of it. You're not writing. That's not a signature. That other guy wrote it for you before. That's what he said before. If somebody else writes it for you, it's got to be incomplete or something. It's not a writing. It's not permanent. So how could you say? Rav said, you scratch it out, right? You etch it out, like you make an indentation in the paper, and he fills it in with ink because the indentation is not writing. The guy fills it in with ink. And Rav Shmuel says, no, you could even write in pencil. Right? We call it pencil, like lead before, and he'll write on top of that. But isn't that real writing? Still kasha. One is with plain lead, like a lead pencil, right? That's a lead pencil. It's made. So that doesn't say. That's just like you're just smearing it on the paper, so to speak. You're smearing it on there because it's easily removed. You can erase it. But if you write lead water like a watercolor, like a lead in water, that's already permanent, and that's considered writing. So we have this. Rav says you have to etch it out in paper. Shmuel says you could even use a pencil because that's erasable. Ravu Amr May Milan. You can use May Milan, which is also gallnut juice. And you could etch out his name, not scratch it out in the paper, but write it with this gallnut juice, and you can write on top of that. We said before that if you wrote the get with rainwater or gallnut juice, that's kosher because that's real writing. So I can say over here, that the initial where you stencil that out for him is it gallnut juice, lo kasha. It depends on what the paper is. If the paper is already gallnut juice, treated with gallnut juice, then gallnut juice on top of gallnut juice won't last. Or low office. In other words, if it wasn't you can't put one on top of another. It's just like saying if I put lead on lead or this ink on that ink, that doesn't do anything. So here he says like this: when is it a good get? When you wrote it with gallnut juice on top of regular paper that wasn't treated with gallnut juice. But as we'll see, if it was treated with gallnut juice and you put gallnut juice on top of it, that's not writing. So over here he said this. So a witnesses who can't sign. So Rav said, scratch it out on paper for them, etch it out and fill it in with ink. Shmuel said you could even use a lead pencil like lead because you're just smearing it on and it's easily erasable. And Rav says you could even use May Milan if the paper was treated with May Milan already before. So therefore it's not permanent, and you could write this. So you could write with gallnut juice and he'll put ink on top of that. But Papa Marok, spit on it. Spit on it won't last. You could spit and form it with spit, and then they'll put ink on top of the spit. Rav Papa also instructed Papa Torah. He was a cattle dealer. He told him, Baruch, use spit. Maybe this cattle dealer was illiterate himself. Maybe he told him, put somebody else who can write, we'll put it on with ink and you'll be the signature. Get this whole heter with etching it out, whether it's with scratching it out or using a lead pencil or using gallnut juice or using spit, is only by gitin. We're only matzah that for gitin. Why? Because of iguna. Because what's our concern? That if you can't find a regular witnesses here, he wants to divorce her and he's leaving. And if he can't find witnesses to sign, he'll leave. She'll be an iguna. Maybe he's going to travel for a long time, or he'll die and she'll be subject to yibum. So he wants to maybe do it as a favor for her. It's a favor for her, so she shouldn't be an iguna. So we're making me say, fine. When it comes to gittin, you can even do it this way. But regular IOUs or bills of sale or gift documents, whatever, we're not matra there. In other words, there you have to go find a person who can sign. This is a kula for people in an extreme situation of a get, and the guy maybe is traveling or he's near death or something of that sort. But for a regular commercial transaction, you have to get regular item. How do we know? It's somebody did that with other kinds of stores where they traced it out for the guy and who couldn't sign. The Nagdi Rav Kana and Rav Kana whipped the guy because it's not proper to do. Tiny said Rav, a proof to what Rav says that you could etch it out, at least in the case of Gittin, you could etch it out for him in one of these manners. Adam Shein Yadam Nachdam, and Adam done not a sign. Mekarin Lahan Niyar. You tear the paper for that, meaning you trace it out, you etch it out in the paper, on near chalak, on blank paper. Mom Shakir, and they fill in the blank space, they fill in the etching with ink. Amr Shimon Leo, that's what we get Nashim, like we said before, and I'm off that. That's only by get Nashim. We'll see why. When it comes to other documents, freeing a slave, a shackle shows, or other commercial transactions, in the likros, if they know how to read velachtum and sign, chotman, you sign. They have to. Then they could sign on their lav. If they don't know how to sign, ain't chotman. Then if they don't on their own, we don't permit that. We don't permit these kind of people, and you etch it out for them. Rather, go find people who can sign. Says more who said anything about reading? We're talking about signing, right? Those are two different functions.
How do you sign something?
What
do they know this is a paper?
Because they know they don't, right? That's correct. They don't know how to read, but somebody else could read it for them, as we'll see. But they know how to sign. Is it possible somebody knows how to sign their signature without knowing how to read? Yes, right? Somebody can learn how to sign their own signature. They don't know how to read. So how do they know what's in there? Somebody reads it for them, as we'll see. So he says like this. So he says, who mentioned anything about reading? We talk about we're talking about Adam who can't sign. If they don't know how to sign, to use this function. It's only about getting not other things. But when it comes to other stars, you have to find somebody who can read and write. Who mentioned about reading? You're talking about signing. It's missing. If they don't know how to read, you read it for them. In other words, if they don't know how to read it for them. So this is what it says. You're reading it over here. Read it, let's say, in court, or read it in front of a few people, so there's no hanky-panky. And then they sign. If they don't know how to sign, then what can you do? You can, if they don't know how to sign, then they don't sign. If they don't know how to sign on their own. If they don't know how to read, you can read it for them, make it sign. If they don't know how to sign, you don't sign for them. Lav ain't chosman. When it comes to other stars, you don't sign for them. Too bad. Go find somebody who can sign. This whole thing, as we said before, Shimon says is what? It's only by gitin. When it comes to other chosman, he says they know how to read it and write and sign chosman. If lav ain't chosman, in other words, he says when it comes to others, that's by gitin nashim. They were making. They say read for them, and they will sign if they can sign. If they don't know how to sign, not at all. But when it comes to other stars, they have to be able to read and write. That's what Shimon Leo says. Amar Blazer, my time Rav Shimon Leo. It's only a heter for agunas because we're afraid that the guy will leave or he'll die, and she won't have a get, and she'll be subject to. She'll be an aguna. He'll go overseas, or maybe he'll die and she'll fall yibam. So you want to be able to give her a get. But when it comes to other things, we don't say. Amar Rabba Shimon looks like Shimon Leo, that it's only by getting. Rav Gamda Mishmei the Rabba Amar Ein Alacha. Lach's not Shimon Leo. They'll look mine to Rabbanan. What are you saying? It's like the Rabbanan. In what sense? That the machshir, that they say it's kosher even by other stars, not just by getting. On the last line of an alf, we said that if you do this by other documents where the Adam can't sign and you etch it out for them, kind of whip those guys for doing that. So how can you say that looks like a bonus? It says Targma Akriya. In this sense, Akriya, what does it mean? That if they know how to sign, they just can't read. Then we say this other sheet that says Rav Gamda Trade Rava says that if they know how to sign, even if they can't read, we read for them, whether it's Gittin or other stars. When it comes to Gittin, right, they have to at least be able to sign. When it comes to Gittin, we allow them even to etch it out. When it comes to other stars, they have to be able to sign, not necessarily to read. In other words, we said, although Shimon says when it comes to other stars, they have to be able to read and sign on their own. The other sheet of Rav Gamda Mishmei Rava says no, lachas not like Shimon Leo, meaning that when it comes to other stars, even if they can't read, you could read for them as long as they could sign. Rav Yehuda mitzdayer kari v'chasim. Rav Yehuda had poor eyesight, and he would force himself to read it. It would be very hard for him to read, and then he would sign it. He had a document in front of him. He would read it with great pain, and then sign. I'm like, so you don't have to bother that. Or Rabbi Lezer, Mar Eretz Yisrael, he was the chief in Eretz Yisrael. And Rashi says, Mar Nida, that he was an expert in discerning different colors of dam to see if it's dam need, if it's tameh or tahor. He was an expert. And Karo Kameh, even though he was good with colors, it was very hard for him to read. So they would read in front of him, Karo Kameh v'chasim. They would read it for him and he would sign. In other words, if you can't read, that's okay. Somebody else could read it for you. And it's mashma we're talking about even other stars, not just Daf Yomi. Rav Nachman Karo Kameh, Sifra Daini v'chasim. Rav Nachman also, the judges, scribes read for him, and he signed. The Daf Rav Nachman, Daf Sifra Daini. Daf Rav Nachman, who was Karav Lamalchus, he was the son-in-law of the Exilard, and the judges, scribes were afraid of him. Disley Emsa, they were afraid of him. They were he inspired them with fear because he was in a high position. Of Rav Nachman and Safra, and let's say Nachman with other Stam Sofrim were not afraid of him, or Safra Daine in Shakrina, or the judges, scribes, but some other aid, not Rav Nachman. Lo, it wouldn't be mutter. In other words, you are allowed to have somebody read it for you as long as it's reliable. You can know. Rav Papa, what he would do is Kiabi also Kamei Shtar Prasa. We learned before that a shtar written in Persian, the Avid Bar Koshkov was written, let's say, in Goyish courts, and it was 2 Jews were involved, and it was written by Goyish courts, even signed by Goyim. So what he would do is what he would do is he would get 2 Goyim to read it for him, not together, in different rooms, and he wouldn't say it's a legal document. Can you help me with this? What does it say over here? Just ask. You pick up a guy in the street and say, "What does this say?" And see, we have somebody else read it for him. We would have 2 people read it to make sure that it was correct, that nobody was playing games, to see that they were in sync. And then he would collect it even from mortgaged property. He would collect it from mortgaged property because it was that was considered good. So even if you can't read, but if somebody reliable can read it for you, that's okay, even by other stars, according to Rav Gamda. According to Rabbah, that the heter is only by gitin, but by other staros, he has to be able to read and sign. Amar Rashi, Amalei Rav Huna Bar Nosam. This one I remember said, Hashtar Parsa. Let's say you have a Persian document, you have Jewish signatures, but it's written in Persian. It's written in Persian. That you can collect with from mortgage property. Why? I said, what are you talking about? How can these Jews sign if they can't write? If it's written in Persian, how could they have signed on it? In other words, how can Yankel be written on a thing? He doesn't read Persian. Yeah, they know how to read Persian. I'm talking about where he knows what he's reading. But you need exam that can't be forged. Presumably, this document was not treated properly with gallnut juice, and therefore it could have been erased, etc. And they could have written some other words there. How could it be reliable? The answer was pizza. No, it was a process with gallnut juice, so therefore it wasn't. You could tell if there was an erasure. The Jewish halacha is that you have to repeat in the last line of the shtar. You have to give a synopsis of what was written above. But like presumably, and it was written in a Goyish court by Persians and Persian handwriting. Apparently, you didn't have that. But matter, you had that too. In other words, what's the chiddush in that? If it was written on a good document that can't be forged, and it was written by the people who signed on it can read Persian, and it had the last line, had a synopsis of everything from before, like a Jewish document is written. What's the chiddush? Of course, it's good. Like my cholosh and kosher. What do you teach me? That it's written in any language. It's written in English or Hebrew or any language, French, whatever. It's okay. We already learned that. Tanina get shekosru ibris ve'edav. If a get that was written in Hebrew and its Adam are signed in Greek, or it's written in Yavonis, it's written in Greek, Adam are signed in Hebrew, kosher. So we know that it doesn't have to be written in English or Hebrew or whatever. It doesn't written Dafka in Hebrew, it could be written in any language. What's the chiddush there? You're saying if it's written in Persian and the Jewish guy signed it, it's okay if they know Persian and all the other qualifications for a good getter there. What's the chiddush? That's only by gitin noshim, maybe because of Shemiguna. We're not making Kamash Milan, that even when it comes to other stars, if it's written in any language, it's accepted. By the way, it's like today, if you bring a will from another country written in another language, it's accepted in the courts here too, in the probate courts. Amr Shmuel. You get to the question, and we know we had the machlokes with Eid Chesima Karti, Eid Masira Karti, and you definitely have to give the get in front of Eidim. That's for sure for it to be kosher. But we talk about, can they read it? He said other people, they can't read it. Other people can read it for them. Does it have to be read before? So he said like this, let's say you gave her a blank piece of paper. Here's your get. Mugureshes. Why? Chashin and Shem maybe because you're worried that maybe, you're concerned that maybe it was written with walnut juice and it got absorbed into the paper. You can't read it now.
Invisible ink.
Right? Yeah, invisible ink. That's what you're concerned. That's what he says the Gemara, Meisvei, how could that be? You give her a blank piece of paper and you say, here's your get, and you say she's divorced for that? Meisvei, I raise a gittach. Let's say he says to her, here's your get. She takes it and she throws it in a fit of anger. She takes the piece of paper and he rolled it up nicely, gives her your get. She takes it and throws it into the water. She threw it into the sea or into the fire, or the holdover oven, or into a furnace. She threw it down the toilet, right? Flushed it down the toilet. Then he said to her, Shtar Pasamu. It was really wasn't a get. I was just fooling. Shtar Pasam is like it's like an act of pious, meaning like to say, sometimes says a guy comes to Bez and a guy comes to borrow some money at the bank and they say, do you have any collateral? Do you have any assets? So he says, oh, here's a document. Kurt gave me a document that he owes me $1 million. And he signed it. So you see, I have all this money coming in. That's a shtar pasam. It's really a fake. It's not true. But he did it just to make him look like he has some money coming in. Or shtar ramona. Or it was really an IOU that sometimes, I need to borrow some money. And I didn't borrow the money yet, but I wanted to have the document handy. So I wrote this document that you lent me $1 million, right? And we signed it. I signed it and everything. So as if I really owe you the $1 million, but it wasn't really the transaction didn't take place. I trusted you that you're not going to collect until you actually give me the money. So maybe I say, you know what, that wasn't a get, it was a shtar pasam, just to show that the money's coming in, or shtar amana, that you had this document that I owe you this money, not really owe it to you yet. She's mugureshes, right? Below Koleman, he's not believed now la'osra to say, oh, you're still my wife and she can't marry anybody else. He's not believed. Now, why is that good time the ikiksav? Because there's some writing on it. He gave her something and she threw it away. Then he said, you know what? He wasn't even a get. Not believed. We assume it's a get. Why? Because there's some writing on it. If it would be that he gave her a blank piece of paper and then said afterwards it wasn't really a get, if that would still be a get, so say nothing was written on it. It's mashma, something was written on it. She just took it, she saw it, she took a quick look, didn't read it, and threw it into the toilet. That's why it's a get. But otherwise, if it's a blank piece of paper, it's no. Does Kikam Shmuel also the Bakinla B'Maydar? When Shmuel says that we're concerned about it, what does Shmuel say? If he gives her a blank piece of paper and he says, here's your get, we're concerned that maybe that she's divorced. We're concerned maybe it was written with walnut juice. So, maybe there was no writing on it at all. Yes, so Shmuel says, you use some sort of a chemical dye that you put on the paper that made the letters come out. Some letters came out. If they came out, they came out. You're right. If you've used this chemical to make the invisible ink appear and nothing came out, you're right. Then it wouldn't be anything. So what happens? It came out. Now it came out, but when he gave it to her, there was nothing there. When he gave it, it was absorbed in the paper. The Shmuel also just means, he doesn't mean it's a good get. He just means we're concerned that maybe it's a get. Why? Maybe it wasn't totally absorbed. And if he dies now, she can't marry a Kohen because maybe she was divorced. And if he dies, she would do Chalis, she wouldn't do. Maybe she's Grugosh. In other words, what Shmuel says is that if he gives her a blank piece of paper and he says, here's your get, that by itself isn't a get. We do is now we process it with some chemical that makes invisible letters come out. If there's nothing letters come out, so it was a blank piece of paper, it was just fooling with it. There's no get. If letters come out now, we have to be concerned that maybe the letters were there when he gave it to her, and possibly she's divorced. Doesn't mean she's for sure divorced. We wouldn't allow her to get remarried based on that yet. But if he dies now, we're concerned maybe she's divorced. She couldn't marry Cohen, and she would get Chalisa, not even if there were no children.
I have a problem with when he gives a get, and who throws it in the river?
presumably she does, but if he gave it to her and she took it and she threw it on the ground and he threw it in the water, the same thing would be. Point is, you can't find it. Now you can't read it. There was writing on there, right? There was writing on it, and he said, Hareza Gitach. Now, the issue is you're bringing another point is, do you have to read it or not? It doesn't say me to read it. Amar Ravina, listen, this goes, he gave it to her. He gave it to her in front of Adam. Now, let's say she threw it in the water. It makes a difference.
No, she has to accept it.
She accepted, and then she threw it into the water. But if he gave her a blank piece of paper, she wasn't divorced. She accepted it. Now the question is, but did you read it? Who read it? Nobody read it, obviously, because we don't know. He says, you can't get rid of it now. Amar Ravina. So let's get into the next question. Amar Ravina, Amali Ameimar. Meimar told me, Hani Beitrei. Two people, the Av get the Kamayo, Edom Asira. Right? Where are the Edom over here? That should be your question, Avram. He gave her the get, she took it, and she accepted it, and then she threw it into the water without reading it. And then he said, you know what? It wasn't really a get. He's not believed to ask her. She's divorced. So what about the Edom? If a get was given in front of two of these Edom Asira, they have to read it. They have to read it to make sure what's going on. Meisvei, what do you mean they have to read it? What about this case we just said? She took the get, he gave her the get, she took it, she threw it into the ocean, or the ore into the fire, the whole of it. And then he said, Shtar Pasim, who was a fake. It wasn't really even a get. There was writing on it, but it was just a star of goodwill, star of mana, an IOU that the loan didn't take place. Mugureshes, she's divorced. He's not believed to say you're still married to me. If you say you have to read it, after they read it, if the Adam have to read it, right? That's the issue over here. He gave it to her in front of the Adam. We say now the Adam have to read it. If the Adam read it, well, how can he tell her now it wasn't really a get? The Adam read it. They saw it. They saw that it was a get. How could he come now and say it wasn't a get if the Adam read it? Right? You have to read it. Can he tell her that after it wasn't a get? Let's read it. The boss, what happened over here is they have to read it. The boss agree after they read it. They read it. Then he put it back in his pocket. Right? He put it back in his sleeve in his pocket. And then he took it out. Maybe he did the switch. Maybe he said, I have a get over here. Right? It was written in front of these two guys, and I'm about to give it. And they read it, gave it back to him, and then he took it out and maybe he switched. Kamash Malam, that we don't say that. So even in this case, it's speaking about where the Adam read the get, but the concern was, right, maybe he switched. They read it, but maybe he switched it.
Signatures on it. Signature the Adam was on it.
Yeah, the signature, but maybe yeah, the Adam Chatima could have been two other guys, right? There's could have been two other guys.
Did they have to write anything?
No, they don't have to write anything if there's the Adam Chatima on there. So that's the issue. So the question over here is, so Tosfos says you have to read it, and if they didn't read it, it's not a get. Elo Karan Yer Delav get. It's not a get, right? But over here in this case, what happened? We can think about what happened over here. He gave her the get. They read it. He put it back in his pocket. Then he took it out and gave it to her in front of them. They had read it, and the concern was, well, maybe he switched it. You didn't see that piece of paper. Maybe you saw a different one. We're not concerned about that. It's not sure they have to read it though. But Tosfos says, let's say they didn't read it. Let's say they didn't read it, and she got remarried based on that. They saw him give her a document, and they didn't read it. They were negligent. They didn't read it. She got married based on that. She shouldn't leave the second marriage. But Tosfos says, but lechatchila, we don't allow her to get married based on that unless they read it. You have to read it. Hahu gavra. The chiddush over here is they read it, but maybe he did a debate and switch. Hahu gavra dezarkla gittin v'silveda done. A man threw a get to his wife among the jars. There were some jars. There were jars, a bunch of jars over there, barrels or whatever, and he threw a get. And apparently the Adam saw it. If there's no Adam who saw giving of the get, then it's not a get. You can't give a get just to her without Adam there. You have to have Adam there. So he threw her a get in her property, in her jars. She had a bunch of jars, and he threw a get. They went to look for the get, and they found a mezuzah there, not a get. So the question is, did he send it? Where's the get? Well, maybe the get was taken away by an animal, a cat or somebody, a rat, or came by and took it away. Now you found the mezuzah there. Amar Nachman, mezuzah beidani lo shchichet. What is the mezuzah doing over there among the jars? Not shech. And therefore, Says not shach. What he really threw was that he was just fooling with her. He said, "Here's your get," and he threw it, and it was really a mezuzah. It was something else. You don't find a mezuzah there, so it's not a get. She's not divorced. Hanimili the ishtaka chad. He only found one. Aval beis v'gimel. Let's say he found 2 or 3 mezuzahs there. So that wasn't necessarily the thing that he threw her, because there were several mezuzahs there. He threw only one document. And he found a few mezuzahs there. The mezuzahs could have been there before. And maybe what he threw at her was really a get, and an animal went and took it away. And she's Mugureshes Misafik. You wouldn't allow her to get married based on that. But if he died, she couldn't marry a Kohen, and he would do Chalitz not Yiva. Habez Gimel, Midahabe, since this mezuzah, this document he found as a mezuzah, Hanami Abe, maybe since this one was here before, you know that he only threw her one document. You found 2 or 3 mezuzahs there. So since one was there, maybe the other one was there also. The Gita, Emerach Barm Shakula, maybe some mice took away the get, and therefore we're concerned that maybe she's divorced. And like Rashi says, maybe she's divorced. Again, maybe she's divorced. Not for sure. You wouldn't let her get married based on that. And obviously, they didn't read it, right? They didn't read it and then see it and then see him throw there, because otherwise they would know if it was a get or not. So from this case, or again, maybe the old thing was, maybe they read it and he switched it. A man went into the shul, Shaka said he took a Sefer Torah, Yov gave it to his wife, here's your get. Took out a Sefer Torah from the Aron Kodesh, said, here's your get. Here's your get. What would you say there? If now you don't see any writing on it, except you looked at the Sefer Torah, it's just a regular Sefer Torah from Bereshis until the end of the Sefer. There's no other writing there. Maybe he wrote it with gallnut juice on the outside, but Sefer Torah treated with gallnut juice, therefore it's right. It's not visible. That's not writing. So if he wrote it like an invisible ink, so to speak, that doesn't count. The pasuk says, because of lost Sefer Krisos, he meant to divorce her with the writing that it says in Kitetse, the parsha of Gitin, where it says, if he wants to get rid of her, because of Sefer Krisos, maybe that. But because of law, the Shema must be written for her, Baleka. It's got to be written for her. He didn't. The Sefer Torah was written to be a Sefer Torah, not for her. So even if you want to say that, right, made him because of law, the Shema, right? Maybe before the Sefer Torah was written, he said, listen to the Sofer, when you write the Sefer Torah, have in mind, I might want to use it one day to divorce my wife. So maybe he said, I want you to have me and my wife in mind, right? Where are the names in there? The basic part. Where's the Torah? You have to have the names there. Even if it was written, he wrote it Lishma. When it says, he's going to use this, Yaakov's going to use this as a divorce right. Where are the names, Veleka? So it's certainly not divorced. Rav Yosef, my Kamash Balon, what's he teach me? Here's a concern, that maybe you took the Sefer Torah and you wrote it with gallnut juice. You wrote the whole get on the outside, let's say on the outside of the parchment, or in the columns on the side, right? In the spaces between. What's the word I'm looking for, Michael? In the Gilyonis, yeah, but you wrote it the English word right again. In the margin. That's it. There you go. Okay. The margin. You write it in the margin. Maybe you wrote the letter. Maybe you wrote it in the margin. But if you wrote it with gallnut juice, because you can't see it, there's nothing you can see. The chiddush is that if you wrote it, even if you wrote it with May Milan and you can't see it, May Milan on the gallnut juice that the Torah was treated with is not considered writing. That's the chiddush. That even if you took the Sefer Torah and you wrote on it in invisible ink, effectively May Milan got Milan, that doesn't count. And if you took a Sefer Torah and he wrote a get on the outside, let's say he actually wrote a proper get on the outside, he gave it to her, it would be a get. Pick it up from here tomorrow. Have a good day. Shavua Tov. What's that?